Hey there, YouTube! Before I get into the video, let me remind you, if you like my content, hit that like and subscribe button, and also if you feel the need to support me, hit me up on my Patreon at patreon.com/uncommonramen, capital U, capital R. I do all this in my free time, so any amount of support can help me bring more of this content to you more often. Alright, this is part 2 of a 3-part Kellan series. Today we're going to take a look at the second Kellan to be released, which was Kellan Daring Traveler. So this is 1 and a white for a 2/3 with an adventure Journey On for 1 green, which is a sorcery. Create X map tokens where X is 1 plus the number of opponents who control an artifact. His creature side says, whenever Kellan Daring Traveler attacks, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card with mana value 3 or less, put it into your hand. Otherwise, you may put it into your graveyard. So what we're going to do here is actually pretty similar to most Selesnya decks, which is going to be lots of tokens and +1/+1 counters, but we're also going to make sure that the creatures, for the most part, are going to be at mana value 3 or less. Alright, so let's take a look at the creatures. Dang, there's a lot. Wow. Okay. Starting with Abzan Falconer, 2 and a white for a 2/3 with Outlast. Each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has flying. We have Archivist of Ogma for 1 and a white. 2/2 with Flash. Whenever an opponent searches their library, you gain a life and draw a card. Augur of Autumn for 1 and 2 green. It is a 2/3. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. You may play lands from the top of your library. And then it has Coven as long as you control 3 or more creatures with different powers. You may cast creature spells from the top of your library. We have Avacyn's Pilgrim, 1 green for a 1/1 that taps for white. Birds of Paradise, 1 green for a 0/1 with flying that taps for any color. Seanote Scout, 1 green for a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, it explores. Champion of Lambholt, 1 and 2 green for a 1/1. Creatures with power less than Champion of Lambholt's power can't block creatures you control. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on Champion of Lambholt. Conclave Mentor for 1 green and 1 white. It is a 2/2. If 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature you control, that many +1/+1 counters are put on that creature instead. When Conclave Mentor dies, you gain life equal to its power. Draneth Magistrate for 1 and a white is a 1/3. Your opponents cannot cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. Elvish Mystic for 1 green. It is a 1/1. You can tap it for green. Emeria Shepherd for 5 and 2 white. It is a 4/4 with flying and landfall. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may return target non-land permanent card from your graveyard to your hand. If that land is a plains, you may return the non-land permanent card to the battlefield instead. Eternal Witness for 1 and 2 green is a 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, you may return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Heliod Suncrowned for 2 and a white is a 5/5 with Indestructible. As long as your devotion to white is less than 5, Heliod is not a creature. Whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or enchantment you control. For 1 and a white, another creature gains lifelink until end of turn. Jade Light Ranger for 1 and 2 green. It is a 2/1. When Jade Light Ranger enters the battlefield, it explores, then it explores again. Jade Light Spelunker for X and a green is a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, it explores X times. Jaheira, Friend of the Forest for 2 and a green is a 2/3. Tokens you control have tap for green. Choose a background. Kami of Whispered Hopes for 2 and a green. It is a 1/1. If 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a permanent you control, put that many +1/+1 counters on that creature instead. Tap to add X mana of any one color, where X is Kami of Whispered Hope's power. Kinjali Dawnrunner. Kinjali's Dawnrunner. 2 and a white for a 1/1 with double strike. When Kinjali's Dawnrunner enters the battlefield, explore. Cutzil, Malamute Exemplar. For 1, a green and a white, it is a 3/3. Your opponents can't cast spells during your turn. Whenever one or more creatures you control, each with power greater than its base power, deal combat damage to a player, you get to draw a card. Llanowar Elves, costs 1 green, it's a 1/1, taps for green. Lauren of the Third Path is 2 and a white for a 2/1 with Vigilance. When Lauren of the Third Path enters the battlefield, destroy target up to 1 target artifact or enchantment, and you can tap this and you and target opponent each draw a card. Merfolk Branchwalker for 1 and a green is a 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, it explores. River Herald Guide for 2 and a green, it is a 3/1 with Vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, explore. Rosie Cotton of South Lane for 2 and a white. When Rosie Cotton of South Lane enters the battlefield, create a food token. Whenever you create a token, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control other than Rosie. Sarenth Steel Seeker for 1 and a green, it is a 1/2. Whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, look at the top card of your library. If it's a land card, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. If you don't put it into your hand, you may put it into your graveyard instead. Seeker of Sunlight. For 1 green, it is a 1/1. You can tap 2 and a green to have Seeker of Sunlight explore, and you can only activate that as a sorcery. Sentinel of the Nameless City. For 2 and a green, it is a 3/4 with Vigilance. Whenever Sentinel of the Nameless City enters the battlefield or attacks, create a map token. Skrelv Defector Might. For 1 white, it is a 1/1 with Toxic 1. Skrelv Defector Might can't block. For 1 Phyrexian white mana, you can tap this to choose a color. Another target creature you control gains Toxic 1 and Hexproof from that color until end of turn. It cannot be blocked by creatures of that color this turn. Sir Ginger the Meal Ender for 2. It is a 3/1. When Sir Ginger the Meal Ender has Trample, Hexproof, and Haste as long as an opponent controls a Planeswalker, and whenever another artifact you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on Sir Ginger and scry 1. For 2, you can tap this, sack it, and gain life equal to its power. Tireless Provisioner for 2 and a green has Landfall. It's a 3/2. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a food token or a treasure token. Tireless Tracker for 2 and a green, it is a 3/2. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, investigate. Whenever you sacrifice a clue, put a +1/+1 counter on Tireless Tracker. Tishana's Wayfinder for 2 and a green is a 2/2. Whenever Tishana's Wayfinder enters the battlefield, it explores. Topography Tracker for 2 and a green, it is a 2/2. Whenever Topography Tracker enters the battlefield, create a map token. If a creature you control would explore, instead it explores, and then it explores again. Welcoming Vampire for 2 and a white is a 2/3 with flying. Whenever 1 or more other creatures you control with power 2 or less enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. And then finally we have Wild Growth Walker for 1 and a green. It is a 1/3. Whenever a creature you control explores, put a +1/+1 counter on Wild Growth Walker and you gain 3 life. Next up we're going to look at instants. Starting with Beast Within, destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green beast creature token. Cosmic Rebirth for 1, a green and a white. Choose target permanent card in your graveyard. If it has mana value 3 or less, you may put it onto the battlefield. If you don't put it onto the battlefield, put it into your hand, you gain 3 life. Generous Gift costs 2 and a white. Destroy target permanent. Its controller creates a 3/3 green elephant creature token. Get Lost for 1 and a white. Destroy target creature, enchantment, or planeswalker. Its controller creates a map token. Inspiring Call for 2 and a green. Draw a card for each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it. Those creatures gain indestructible until end of turn. Path to Exile for 1 white. Exile target creature. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card. Put that card onto the battlefield tap, then shuffle. Swords to Plowshares for 1 white. Exile target creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. Next up is sorceries. Starting with Cultivate for 2 and a green. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards. Reveal those cards. Put 1 onto the battlefield. Tap the other into your hand. Then shuffle. Enter the Unknown for 1 green. Target creature you control explores. You may play an additional land this turn. Explore for 1 and a green. You may play an additional land this turn and draw a card. Helping Hand for 1 white. Return target creature card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Kayla's Reconstruction for X and 3 white. Look at the top 7 cards of your library. Put up to X artifact and or creature cards with mana value 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Over the Edge for 1 white. 1 and a green. I don't know why I said white. Choose 1. Destroy target artifact or enchantment. Target creature you control explores, and then it explores again. Savine's Reclamation for 2 and a white. Return target permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. If the spell was cast from your graveyard, you may copy this spell, and you may choose new targets for the copy. Flashback 4 and a white. Okay, next up is Artifacts. Got Arcane Signet. It costs 2. You can tap it for 1 mana of your color identity. Glowcap Lantern. It costs 1 green. Equipped creature has, you may look at the top card of your library at any time, and whenever this creature attacks, it explores. It equips for 2. Inspiring Statuary. It costs 3. Non-artifact spells you cast have Improvise. Lightning Greaves costs 2. Equipped creature has Haste and Shroud. It equips for 0. Selesnya Signet. It costs 2. You can tap 1 and tap it to add green and white. Sol Ring. It costs 1. You can tap it to add 2 colorless. Swiftfoot Boots costs 2. Equipped creature has Hexproof and Haste, and it equips for 1. And then finally we have Talisman of Unity. It costs 2. You can tap it for colorless, or you can tap it to add green and white and have Talisman of Unity deal 1 damage to you. Okay, next up is enchantments. Starting with Exploration. For 1 green, it's an enchantment. Whenever you play you may play an additional land each turn. Felidar Retreat for 3 and a white has landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you get to choose to either create a 2/2 cat beast token or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain vigilance until end of turn. Hardened Scales for 1 green. If 1 or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature you control, put that many +1/+1 counters on them instead. Path of Discovery for 3 and a green. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it explores. Sylvan Library for 1 and a green. At the beginning of your draw step, you may draw 2 additional cards. If you do, choose 2 cards from your hand drawn this turn. For each of those cards, either pay 4 life or put them back on top. Takasia's Welcome for 2 and a white. Whenever 1 or more creatures with mana value 3 or less enter the battlefield under your control, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. Tribute to the World Tree for 3 green. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card if its power is 3 or greater. Otherwise, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Twists and Turns for 1 green. If a creature you control would explore, instead, scry 1. Then that creature explores. When Twists and Turns enters the battlefield, target creature you control explores. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, if you control 7 or more lands, transform Twists and Turns, which turns into Mycoid Maze, which you can tap for green, or you can pay 3 and a green and tap it to look at the top 4 cards of your library. Reveal a creature card from among them, and put that card into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Okay, next up is Planeswalkers. There is 1. We've got Elspeth Resplendent. This is 3 and 2 white for 5 loyalty. The +1 is choose up to 1 target creature, put a +1/+1 counter and a counter from among Flying, First Strike, Lifelink, and Vigilance on it. The -3 is look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may put a permanent card with mana value 3 or less from among them onto the battlefield with a shield counter on it. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. And its -7 is to create 5 3/3 white angel creature tokens with flying. Okay, next up is going to be non-basic lands. Starting with Bountiful Promenade, which is a crowd land for green-white. Branchloft Pathway, which is a MDFC land for green-white. Brushland, which is a pain land for green-white. Canopy Vista, which is a check land for green-white. Command Tower, which taps for your color identity. Fabled Passage, which fetches for a basic land and puts into play untapped if you have 4 or more lands at that point. Or is it 5? 4? 5? 4. Yeah. Gavity Township taps for colorless. You can also pay 2, a green and white, and tap it to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Minas Tirith enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a legendary creature. Taps for white. You can also pay 1 and a white and tap it to draw a card, and only activate that if you attacked with 2 or more creatures this turn. Overgrown Farmland enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more other lands. Taps for green-white. Rogue's Passage taps for colorless. You can pay 4 and tap it to have target creature become unblockable for that turn. Scattered Groves, which enters tapped. It can cycle, and it taps for green and white. Sunpetal Grove, which is another check land for green-white. Temple Garden, which is a shock land for green-white. And Temple of Plenty, which is a scry land for green-white. All right, last we have basic lands. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 forests. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 planes. So that's the second Kellan in the series, the Selesnya green-white. Basically, as you can see, +1/+1 counters and tokens, just like any Selesnya deck. But we're going to utilize a bunch of very low-cost creatures and a lot of ways to reoccur them to continue to get the value. Obviously, cards like the Drannith Magistrate are cards, and Sylvan Library are cards that you can probably drop for something more budget. But yeah, Kellan Daring Traveler. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. Keep it positive. I will remove negative comments. And until next time, guys, peace.